This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, I'm with Josh Bossé to examine John 6 for a second time, looking at the test Jesus gives to his disciples as they prepare to feed the 5,000.
Yes, we've got ourselves a sticky little passage today. We're going to be looking at this very strange test that Jesus gives his disciples. And, before we jump into reading, I really want us to kind of sit back and, put our good question asking, Bama thinking caps on. And as we're listening to this, I want us to really think, what exactly is the test? Because we're told Jesus is testing Philip here. We'll hear about that in a second. But what is the test really? And Brent, why don't you go and take it away? Read the first 6 verses there.
Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do.
Right. So again, what exactly is the test? How is he testing Philip here? And what are we to make of this? Like, we're not given a ton of information here, other than just knowing that it is a test. But we have a couple pieces to the puzzle. We have the background setting. We have crowds following them around. Jesus has been doing signs, and they're following him. And Passover is near. And I think if we kind of start thinking more about that, we have a lot of people following Jesus. There's a lot of signs. Passover is near, especially the Passover fact, because that he went out of his way to say that, especially because, it says it's near Passover. John is putting that detail there for a reason. And if we think about Passover and signs, and what is Jesus's question? Where are we going to get bread so people can eat? That's a very Passover themed question. Bread is a big, important part of Passover. And in fact, Brent, what is, do you know the specific laws around Passover and bread?
Well, you have to have completely different kind of bread than you would normally have.
Exactly. Yeah. Fundamentally different kind of bread. You don't use any yeast, no leavening at all. And so Jesus' question is kind of weird in that respect too, because, it's like there's may not even be that much bread around.
If you say bread without the unleavened qualification, do people automatically assume it's just regular bread?
I would think so, yeah. Bread's a pretty big staple. So yeah, I would assume that would be the case. And it's also, as always, the Hebrew to Greek transition is going to be troublesome to us because the word for bread in Hebrew can also technically just mean food generically, because bread kind of accompanies every single meal. So, that's a good point. But presumably it's not Passover yet. It says Passover is near. But, if people are getting the leaven out of their house, it's certainly not going to be as abundant as it would normally be. But to kind of get the background here, as to Jesus is asking Philip a question about the people. So if we're going to look at the people are following Jesus. It's near Passover and Jesus is doing a bunch of signs. And if we're going to draw a big parallel from this, what would we be looking at? The people are saying to themselves, hey, it's almost Passover. Here's this guy doing miracles. I know another Passover where there was a guy doing all these miraculous signs and wonders. That's Moses.
The very first one.
Exactly. And we're in captivity. We're in Roman oppression. We're ready to leave Egypt. And we're looking for a Moses to lead us. And so I wonder if that's, probably what's in the back of the people's heads as they're following Jesus, especially around this time of year, even if they're not maybe explicitly thinking that yet. That's that's the vibe. We've talked elsewhere in Bama about how, around Passover, they sent in extra Roman legions and leaders and stuff to make sure everything stayed shipshape, because people get pretty rowdy when they think about Exodus and when they think about leaving Egypt when they're under oppression. So the people are probably already in this frame of mind of I'm ready to leave Egypt and this guy looks like he might be up to the task, you know? So to turn now to Jesus' question to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? Now, there's two things I want to point out there. First of all, like I said already, it's kind of a, you know, people are going to be throwing out their leaven, cleaning for Pesach. Like, that's a very rigorous process. If you've ever been around an Orthodox Jewish community, they take that very seriously. They literally like go around their house with a feather, gathering like every single crumb and cleaning beer stains out of things. Like they take it very, very seriously. So, you know, it's very possible that there's not going to be a lot of bread to be found. And, you know, more broadly, I think Jesus is asking Philip, like, how are we going to take care of all these people? And I think when we bring those two concerns into the light of like the Passover atmosphere, I think Jesus is really asking Philip, you know, do you think we can give these people the Pesach, the liberation that they're looking for? And in a roundabout way, I think what Jesus is actually asking is like, do you think the people are getting what the signs are for? Are they picking up what I'm putting down? In other words, like, are they just looking for Jesus to play the role of Moses? Do they have certain expectations that Jesus is actually going to fulfill? Or is there like kind of a mismatch between their expectations and what Jesus is actually going to provide for them? And I think that's what Jesus is asking Philip, because, you know, if he's just asking him about bread, it's a little bit of a silly question, especially in the context of a rabbi and a student. But asking, you know, looking at these people who want a certain type of Pesach, and Jesus saying like, hey, can we give that to them? Can we actually give them the liberation they're looking for? That's a juicy question for a young Talmud to answer. And yeah, I think what we'll see in short order is that Philip gives a pretty dang good answer.
Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." And having peeked ahead at your notes a little bit, I know that we have to dig into the NIV's footnotes here under half a year's wages, and note that the Greek says 200 denarii.
Yes, 200 denarii. And that's important because, yeah, it's a little bit, again, nonsensical if we're just talking about an amount of money, because, yeah, 200 denarii would be a little over half a year's wages, because I think a denarii is a day's wages. So, you know, 200 is more than halfway through 365. And it's a little bit, you know, like if he's just answering the question straightforwardly, you know, the way I always heard it taught in Sunday school, that like Philip is just, you know, thinking in earthly terms and doesn't have enough faith and doesn't get that Jesus can do miracles yet. Then, you know, if like, let's just suppose that that's what he's saying, is that he's literally just saying, hey, we don't have the money to get enough bread. First of all, that ignores the problem of it being Passover, and it's going to be hard to find bread anyway, so why even bring up the issue of cost? And then further, like, why specify an amount of money if that's not even the amount of money that you would need to feed the people properly? Like, because he doesn't just say 200 denarii is what we would need. He says 200 denarii wouldn't be enough for everyone to just get a little bit. Like, you know, why not just say, hey, we would need, if, you know, 500 denarii to feed all these people, and we don't have that.
Or simply say we don't have enough money.
Exactly.
Like maybe 200 is what they have.
Well, yes, that could be the one thing. But I think if that was the case, then he would, you know, I think there's a problem with that, and that's the scarcity of bread in general. It doesn't really answer the kind of undertone of Jesus's question there. And also, like, the number 200 denarii is pretty specific as well. And that got me digging, and I got to give a shout out here, because this episode, which will be in two parts, because we have a lot of remezim to get through, ladies and gentlemen, so buck up. We're going to be hearing a lot of text today, but I got to give a shout out to, last time I shouted out my fellow study member, Rachel Bergman. This time I'm going to shout out the other member of my chavurah, Ben Casperson, because this part of the episode probably wouldn't exist, because when I had kind of first cracked into John 6 and started figuring some of this stuff out, I was really stumped by this test. I was like, well, I don't know what Philip's saying. I don't know what Jesus is really saying. And we found a remez that kind of seemed to fit, but I wasn't seeing it. And Ben was the one who really pushed me. He was like, no, this is it. We got to dig in. And the more we dug in, it just kept clicking. So Shout out to Ben. He rocks. He made this part possible. So really, this should come as no surprise to anyone who listens to this. 200 denarii, it's a specific number. And if we're looking for remazim, we're looking in the text. Where are we going to find that? Now, there's a little bit of a hang up here because a denarius is not around in the Tanakh. They don't talk about any denarii in the Tanakh, but they are silver coins. And if we look for stories with 200 silver shekels, we're left with a couple options, but really only one of them fits the situation. And that is the story of Micah in Judges 17 and 18. And why don't we go ahead and just read Judges 17 first, just to get the setup, and then we'll read the conclusion of Micah's story in Judges 18 after that.
Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, "The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it." Then his mother said, "The Lord bless you, my son." When he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, "I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make an image overlaid with silver. I will give it back to you."
I'm going to pause you right there because there's some weird things. Like this is, for everyone who isn't, intimately familiar with this random story in Judges, this is our first introduction to Micah. There's no preceding story, but the way we come into it is kind of, in media res, like, we come in after some things have already taken place. There's this big amount of money, 1,100 shekels of silver, and he's talking to his mom, and he says, "You spoke a curse over whoever took this money, and look, here it is, I have it." And then instead of cursing, she kind of rescinds her curse by blessing him, and he gives the money back to her, and she says, "I'm going to give this money to God to make a carved image and a cast metal image, and I'll give it back to you." And it's this very weird, like, what is going on here? Like, there's a very convoluted passing of money back and forth. Like, is there some communication problem? What's going on? And there's also some other interesting context, because this number, 1,100 shekels of silver, was very prominent in the previous story, the Samson story, because that's how much money the Philistines paid to Delilah to betray Samson. So there's a very strong hint that his mother here might be Delilah, which also, that's very important for this story. It kind of casts some doubt maybe onto her intentions. And the other thing we notice here is that this character Micah seems to be a God-fearer. Like, if he is indeed Samson's son and Delilah is his mom, then he would be the patriarch, because, Samson's story ends with him dying. So presumably this money would probably be his to do as he pleased with legally. But he is so worried about this curse that his mother uttered in the name of Adonai, that he gives her back all the money, and then she tells him that she was intending to use it to make some sort of carved and cast metal image, presumably to honor or worship Adonai. Again, this is Judges, kind of back before things were ship shape. So it's a little bit of the Wild West out there. So it might seem odd to us that they're making images when we know that they're not supposed to do that. But, everyone kind of just did whatever. But at the very least, we can see that Micah fears Adonai, and certainly fears him more than he cares about money, which is, that's saying something, especially in Judges. There's a lot of wild stuff that goes down in Judges. So at the very least, Micah is kind of a Boaz-esque figure, a good guy in the midst of Judges. A hard thing to find. So anyway, with that being said, let's continue.
So after he returned the silver to his mother, she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, who used them to make the idol, and it was put in Micah's house. Now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some household gods, and installed one of his sons as his priest. In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been living with the clan of Judah, left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah," he said, "and I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah said to him, "Live with me, and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes, and your food." So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. And Micah said, "Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest."
Okay.
So many repeated details in there.
Yes, very much so. And the repetition is generally, again, setting up, it's kind of, most of it goes to emphasize that Micah is, again, kind of in the context of Judges, trying to follow Adonai as best as he can. I mean, if we look at the details here, like, okay, so the chapter kind of ends with him finding this Levite priest and hiring him, and we might look at that kind of askew and be like, you're hiring your own priest. But let's remember that the story set up before that he had his son acting as like his household priest or whatever. And I'm not exactly sure what his duties would be. Probably had to do with the ephod. I'll get to that in a second. But, as soon as the Levite shows up, he goes from having a priest that basically, other than food and clothing, he didn't have to pay his son 10 shekels a year. He finds this Levite and he's like, oh no, I want a Levite because, at some level, Micah must have some knowledge of Torah and is making an attempt to follow it. So again, we have a lot of repetition of Micah's piety and his reverence for Adonai specifically. Now there's a couple things early on that, in that passage or that part of the passage you read that I want to highlight. And the first is what happens with the silver he returns to his mom, because it's a little unclearly worded and the rabbis have a lot of debate. And all of it comes around the 200 pieces of silver, which after all is the remez that we're following. So we should look at that really closely. So he gives his silver back to his mom, which is 1,100 shekels, and she takes 200 shekels and gave them to the silversmith, who then turned the 200 shekels into, the literal phrase is a carved image and a cast metal image, which to me it seems to indicate that it might be a very ornate piece if it requires like multiple kinds of metallurgical arts. But there's also a discrepancy in the numbers. Like what happened? She consecrated the whole 1,100, but only 200 went to the silversmith. Like, what's going on there? Did she just rip off her son? Or there is another possible explanation where maybe one piece of the 1,100 was used as the actual substance of the idol, and then the rest of it, maybe the 200 was the payment to the silversmith. It's a little bit unclear whether or not like his mom, who may or may not be Delilah, is totally ripping him off or not. There's certainly room for doubt there, especially given, the hint that she might be Delilah, or at least is meant to evoke Delilah. But nevertheless, the 200 shekels at root is going to represent Micah's piety and his willingness to like dedicate his fortune, his wealth, his livelihood to the service of Adonai, which we see repeated throughout the chapter, and him enticing this Levite to come, and not just to like, again, we could look at this cynically and say, oh, Micah's, just looking to get God on his good side. But, he doesn't just tell the Levite like, hey, here's 10 shekels. So God won't be mad at me. He says, come be a father to me. Like this seems like a very earnest effort on Micah's part. Now, there's something else I want to cover here, and that is like, what exactly is the priest doing? Because, he says, it will be good between God and me, and he uses the word tov there, the same word that's used in creation. So again, we could look at that cynically, and maybe there's a touch of selfishness here, but I think, there is, again, like that kind of earnest desire to have a good relationship with God. But the thing is that they do have a tabernacle at this point, and it's in Shiloh, which is in the hill country of Ephraim. I don't know exactly how far away it is, but presumably he would be able to go there pretty easily to worship Adonai. So, and there doesn't seem to be anything here that talks about an altar or sacrifices being brought. So likely what the priest is doing is using the ephod, which We have scriptural evidence is used as kind of like a divination source. Like you could use it to ask God questions and God would respond. David uses the ephod in this way. And I think there are a couple other places, but the rabbis are all pretty on board with that interpretation pretty universally, that that's what the ephod was used for. So, we have a man who is spending exorbitant amounts of money to create, religious iconography and items to worship God. And then on the other hand, to seek God's guidance in things. So again, we could get a little cagey about the idolatrous aspect of all this, but on the whole, especially in the context of Judges, Micah seems to be a really good dude and really trying to follow God earnestly. And if we're going to keep in mind why Philip is referencing this, I think what Philip is trying to say just on a very general level is that the people are like Micah. But in order to understand how that answers Jesus' question, we're going to need to understand how Micah's story ends, which means we're going to have to read Judges 18.
Right before we go on, I do have a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah, totally. Shoot.
As far as the timeline here, so we have in verse 4, the silversmith making the idol, and it was put in Micah's house. But then after that, it says, this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some household gods, and installed one of his sons as his priest.
Mm-hmm.
So is the idol in addition to the other things that were already in place? Or was it like, hey, I've got this idol now, I need to build up some other structures around it, because it'd be weird to just have this idol without a more elaborate setup?
Yeah, so the phrase denoting the shrine there is literally house of God, Beit Elohim. So presumably he commissioned this wildly expensive image of God. And then, again, yeah, it's it probably looks awkward if you just put it on your kitchen table. So yeah, there's probably a lot of, he's building a little, maybe it'd be too far to say a little mini temple, but he is building a shrine, a full, he has a lot of space in his dwelling dedicated to Adonai. And I think it's, you're probably right in that this is additional stuff that he built up around this central piece, but it does seem like the silver image is probably the centerpiece, the thing that represents Adonai, and all these other things around it are kind of added over time, and are kind of elaborate ornamentations on top of that. And again, this would be seen as greatly to Micah's credit. In fact, even to this day, when the rabbis talk about, fulfilling the mitzvahs of Torah, they always talk about how it's better to go beyond just fulfilling them, but to ornament the mitzvah, to do it in a beautiful way. And so we see that Micah has that really pure desire to worship God, where he doesn't just want to he's not just doing the bare minimum, showing up to temple, doing, giving the sacrifices he needs to. He is going to exorbitant lengths to make his basically his whole little house, his whole Beit Av, is all centered around worshiping Adonai. And that is like you said before, there's a lot of repetition here, and it all goes to reinforce that Micah wants to worship Adonai. Micah is zealous in this regard.
And the household gods, would that just be a limited of an understanding of how God functions in their day? And so he's well,
yeah,
there must be some sort of spirits or gods or something at play in this particular place, in my particular household. So I'm going to create these things and put them around the idol of the bigger, more important God, and represent as hey, my house and my everything going on here is in service to God.
Yeah, it could be other gods. I mean, again, this is kind of Judges is one of the oldest books of the Bible that we have like records of. So it could be that this was, still in the birth pangs of monotheism, when they were still had some of those old pantheistic ideas where that like wouldn't have been seen as a contradiction. Or it could be, like, I don't know, they might even be representative of ancestors or something like that. I've heard, Rachel told me once that, household gods were sometimes like used to symbolize like the, like inheritance basically. So there could be a lot of things going on there. This definitely suggests that like, this bears the mark of Judges. This is really, really old, back before they, had the monotheism thing figured out. So it's my guess is just it's some of those old pantheistic ideas. It might be additional local gods, or it might be like other gods that were considered associated with Adonai at this point. Like it's unclear. And we know when they left Egypt, they were hanging around with Jethro and some Midianites, and it even says some Egyptians went with them. So there were, even in, we talk about how, the plagues were aimed at the different Egyptian gods. So there was still a possible like way of looking at this and still believing that there were other gods that you needed to appease or whatnot. But definitely this is showing that Micah's reverence is primarily toward Adonai, and everything else is secondary, because we have it's starting out with him being afraid of a curse from Adonai, and then dedicating this vast sum of money to the worship of Adonai, and everything being a shrine kind of built around that, and then him going out of his way to find a Levite. Like, this is a guy who is about Adonai. There may be some other kind of cultural things, mainstays there, but it doesn't seem to be the point of the passage, I would say.
Fair enough. On to Judges 18 then. In those days, Israel had no king. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites sent 5 of their leading men from Zorah and Eshtaol to spy out the land and explore it. These men represented all the Danites. They told them, "Go explore the land." So they entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So they turned in there and asked him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here?" He told them what Micah had done for him, and said, "He has hired me, and I am his priest." Then they said to him, "Please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful." The priest answered them, "Go in peace. Your journey has the Lord's approval," which I find really interesting, because there's no indication whatsoever that he actually inquired of God. He just...
Yes, although this is where I think that probably his priestly duties was to like use the ephod to like divine what God wanted. So I think that might be why they don't mention it. Because that's the only other piece of the puzzle. They have an ephod. We know it's used for divination. These guys come, they ask him a question of what God wants, and he gives them an answer. So it could very well be that they just assumed that, the priest is going to do his one job,
sure,
since he's offering sacrifices there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety, like the Sidonians, at peace and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relationship with anyone else. When they returned to Zorah and Eshtaol, their fellow Danites asked them, "How did you find things?" They answered, "Come on, let's attack them. We have seen the land, and it is very good. Aren't you going to do something? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you get there, you will find an unsuspecting people and a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatever." Strange choice there.
Yeah.
NIV I would expect a whatsoever. Make it sound a little fancier. Then 600 men of the Danites, armed for battle, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol. On their way, they set up camp near Kiriath Jearim in Judah. This is why the place west of Kiriath Jearim is called Mahaneh Dan to this day. From there, they went on to the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. Then the 5 men who had spied out the land of Laish said to their fellow Danites, "Do you know that one of these houses has an ephod, some household gods, and an image overlaid with silver? Now you know what to do." So they turned in there and went to the house of the young Levite at Micah's place and greeted him. The 600 Danites, armed for battle, stood at the entrance of the gate. The 5 men who had spied out the land went inside and took the idol, the ephod, and the household gods, while the priest and the 600 armed men stood at the entrance of the gate. When the 5 men went into Micah's house and took the idol, the ephod, and the household gods, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" They answered him, "Be quiet, don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and clan in Israel as priest, rather than just one man's household?" The priest was very pleased. He took the ephod, the household gods, and the idol, and went along with the people. Putting their little children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them, they turned away and left. When they had gone some distance from Micah's... Okay, hold on a second.
Yeah.
They put them in front of them and then turned and left. What does that mean? That seems like a really weird way to say that.
It's a good question. We're
maybe that's completely beside the point, but that's just like
it is
kind of trips me up as I'm reading through it.
The whole Danite story. I mean, there's a lot that's interesting there throughout. Thankfully, we aren't going to dig into that too much because there's a lot there. I'm guessing them putting the children and the livestock and the valuables up front is either they're like worried about being attacked from behind, or they're putting their weakest in front. But I don't know. They also put their valuables up there. I don't know what to make of that, and I didn't look at that too closely because our focus is going to be on Micah. But yeah, I think generally we can look at the Danites and see that they aren't great.
Yeah, I mean, they made some famously bad choices. Let's see. When they had gone some distance from Micah's house, the men who lived near Micah were called together and overtook the Danites. As they shouted after them, the Danites turned and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you that you called out your men to fight?" He replied, "You took the gods I made and my priest and went away. What else do I have? How can you ask, 'What's the matter with you?'" The Danites answered, "Don't argue with us, or some of the men may get angry and attack you, and you and your family will lose your lives." So the Danites went their way, and Micah, seeing that they were too strong for him, turned around and went back home. Then they took what Micah had made, and his priest, and went on to Laish against a people at peace and secure. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. There was no one to rescue them, because they lived a long way from Sidon and had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Bet Rehov. The Danites rebuilt the city and settled there. They named it Dan after their ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel, though the city used to be called Laish. There the Danites set up for themselves the idol, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idol Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh.
Yes. So, not a great end for Micah. And an interesting detail there at the end that this Levite is apparently Moses' grandson. Very strange detail to throw in right at the end. And I'm not going to make too much out of it, but it would probably be some real juicy stuff there if someone was inclined to dig into that. But the main point is that, Micah loses everything, all his piety, all his reverence for Adonai, all of himself that he devoted to God was gone in literally a single day. He lost it all. And I think this kind of plays off the same thing we saw earlier where, maybe his mom was kind of using his piety by conspicuously uttering this curse to get the money back. She's kind of playing off his piety to manipulate him. And I think again, here we see that Micah's piety kind of ends up being his downfall, and that, he's invested everything into creating this, wonderful shrine to Adonai, and without any concept that his little kingdom is kind of a house of cards, and now he can't do anything to stop it from being taken away from him. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Brent?
Oh, not in particular. I do think it's interesting that they say explicitly in the story, like, yeah, Micah realized that they were too strong for him. So he's just like, well,
Yeah.
I guess we'll go home.
Yeah. What am I going to do? Yeah. They took it, they got bullied by a bigger, stronger dude, and he's got no recourse. And part of that's just, like it says repeatedly throughout the story, there's no king in these days. This is Judges. This is the Wild West. And interestingly, we'll see the issue of there not being, or the issue of there being a king or not being a king come up in Jesus' story. But, again, let's back up and think, what is the point Philip is making? Why is he likening the people to Micah? Why is he comparing them to this 200 shekels that's used to make this image that is kind of, the story literally ends by talking about that image. So it's kind of the through line, image-wise, of the whole story. It represents Micah's piety, and it's taken away from him. He's powerless to stop it. And we could look at that and see, on one hand, it kind of is a little bit strange, because we would expect that Micah's piety would be rewarded by God protecting him. But I think what the story really goes to illustrate is that piety by itself, just pure devotion, can also come with some maybe naivety, maybe some short-sightedness. And either way, I think Philip's point is that the people, they have a lot of desire to follow Jesus. The people are riled up and ready to go and ready to give it all, but they may not get the big picture. They may be a little bit naive. And if they had their way, they may, like with the Levites, say, oh, Jesus, come be our Levite. We'll set up our little mini kingdom here, only for that kingdom to get knocked down because it's not stable. It's just this little kind of insular thing they got going on. And so, again, in the context of Jesus's question about them looking at Jesus to maybe be their new Moses, on the one hand, it seems like he's kind of giving them some credit for being, pious and faithful and full of zeal for God, but that ultimately they are, again, kind of short-sighted and naive. And even without getting into maybe some of the selfishness behind that, or at least the not having as big of a scope as Jesus has, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what Jesus is here to do. And this is really interesting too, because after Philip's answer, Andrew chimes in and gives his kind of addition to this answer. And why don't we go ahead and read that?
Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?
So again, usually this is used to dunk on Andrew and be like, oh, they don't know Jesus can do miracles yet. They don't get that he's the man. But I think Andrew is adding another remez to this. The barley loaves, barley is brought up a lot. It could be a remez to a lot of things. It's probably on one level a reference to Elisha, who uses barley loaves to feed a large number of people. It could also be a reference to the sota ritual, where a husband is suspicious that his wife has cheated on him. It could be a reference to root. There's a lot of barley imagery there, or just to Shavuot and the barley harvest in general. A lot of different directions we could go with that. But this time, I think there is another Judges remez to the story of Gideon. And this time we just have a really short bit to read. Why don't you go ahead and read Judges 7.
Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands.
So right off the bat, this is really weird. You might expect there to be some play on words between the word for barley loaf and the word for Gideon, but no, there's no connection there. A lot of scholars are really perplexed by this. But I found a really good internet comment by some random person, Eli Rosencraft, if you're out there and listening, thanks for hooking me up. He pulled primarily from a classic Talmudic commentary called Me'am Loez by a Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. And basically what he says is this: the barley cake does not have the gluten content of wheat, so it doesn't stick together like wheat bread. In this case, it is not even a proper leavened loaf. In fact, the word it uses here is not lechem traditionally, but uga. And, it's not called nuga, it's called tzilil. So it's like literally like a lump of just like dough that's been roasted, unleavened, and it's only eaten by the poorest of the poor, basically. It's kind of like hardtack or something. As it rolls toward the camp of Midian, it breaks into crumbs, just as Gideon's forces are progressively broken down from 32,000 to just 300, not even a battalion. Yet the crumbs overturn the tents of Midian, laying it flat like the unleavened cake that the tzilil was when it started. And there's also an element here of tit for tat, because the original grievance they have with the Midianites is that they are stealing the harvest and leaving the Israelites destitute. And now those crumbs that they left the Israelites, the crumbs of the harvest, are returning to take revenge. And so the barley is kind of a symbol of lowliness, which kind of follows a lot of the themes of Gideon's whittling down of his men just in general, but also the fact that the ones he selected are the ones who lapped water, and it compares them to dogs. So there's a lot going on in that image of comparing Gideon's army to this lowly lump of barley bread that overturns the mighty army of Midian. And so I think on one level, what Andrew is saying here is that I think he's suggesting that Jesus kind of follow the Gideon model and say, hey, if these people don't really get what we're doing, why don't we whittle them down? And the other thing is that, I believe it was, I can't believe it wouldn't be pointed out, but in the previous episode that, the 5 loaves and the 2 fish are obviously emblematic of Torah, the 5 books, the 2 tablets. And so what Andrew seems to be saying is like, hey, if they're expecting you to do the Moses thing, why don't you just give them the teaching, but, give them the real thing? If they aren't picking up what you're putting down, tell them what you're putting down, and through that process, they'll be whittled down as their expectations are broken. I think that's what Andrew's saying. And that could be a stretch, but the fact is that ends up being what Jesus does. And especially, since we're doing a repeat episode, I'm sure everyone has been following along with this series, remembers that, Jesus really goes off the deep end and gets a lot of, says a lot of contentious things that get a lot of people to leave him. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that Philip and Andrew are like right on the money. And this isn't to say that like Jesus is necessarily following their advice, but rather they understand what Jesus is hinting at. They both have been paying attention to Jesus' teaching long enough. They know who Jesus, they know their rabbi well enough to get where he's going with it. When he points out and says, hey, it's near Passover, do you think we can actually feed these people? They get that he's saying like, are they actually on the right track? Can we give them what they're looking for, what they're hungry for? And they're saying, Philip's saying, not really, they're zealous, but it's kind of a dead end here. It seems like they don't get the bigger picture. And then Andrew jumps in and says, hey, it seems like you're saying we should, whittle them down. So let's just give them the Torah that you have to give them. Now, as for like, what do we take away from this before we dive into Jesus, like actually, performing the miracle and engaging with the people? I think it's really incredible to take stock of the fact that Jesus is really not about blind success. I mean, I think especially if we think in modern context and, having a big following is, considered enviable among most people. Everyone wants to be famous. Everyone wants to be on TV. Everyone wants to have 1 million followers or whatever. And Jesus is really not about that kind of blind success. We kind of have a sense that winning is always good. More is always better. And Jesus seems to like not be against these people following him, but really having a more qualitative and more rooted understanding of what he is actually trying to accomplish, rather than just, having big numbers and a big following. He's not just trying to pump up the Jesus brand and get buzz generated around Jesus. He is trying to build kingdom. He has goals to build something that are bigger than him. And when I say that, I should say like Jesus, the man who lived for, 33 years, not Jesus, the eternal, infinite Jesus.
Well, and I would say bigger than the moment that he's living in too. Like it's not just about this crowd here. It's about, reaching the world.
Exactly. And I think we could all learn from that. We have one of the deepest concepts, I think, in America, the way we've particularly metabolized Hellenism and all those other, juicy Western things that we love, is that winning is so important to us. And it's really quite perplexing, especially when we put it in more practical terms, to intentionally lose, to intentionally shrink your audience, to intentionally push people away when you're trying to build something. Doesn't make any sense. But when we look at it with Jesus's eyes, it really can change and help us divorce ourselves of that kind of blind success, win at all costs, winning is always great mentality. And I think that's something that's really important when we do kingdom work and when we build our own communities. And that's something that is always good to keep in mind.
Definitely. Well, I think that does it for this first part of our re-examination of John 6, if that's good for you.
Yeah.
I do think we should give people a brief update.
Oh, yes.
On your health situation. So just so everyone knows where we're all at here. So this is, we're talking to you from episode 286. Josh's last episode, 281, has been out for less than 2 weeks. So it's June 14th now. That episode came out June 2nd. And we recorded that episode April 19th. And in the less than 2 months since we recorded that first episode, so many things have changed.
Yes.
So many things have been moving quickly. And this episode that we're talking on right now is supposed to come out in 3 weeks, but there's a very good chance quite a bit could change between now and then as well. So we'll give you the update as we have it now, but possibly after the music of this episode or next week's episode, there may be an extra little segment with further information because things are happening quickly.
Yes, things are happening very quickly. Yeah. So since the last time we recorded, I got a phone call from the Mayo Clinic and they told me that I am at the top of the donor list. Praise God. So we are up in Minnesota right now waiting on a liver. We did pretty much every preliminary thing we needed to do before the surgery. I had a little pre-surgery that was kind of the last big bottleneck. Basically, they were checking to see if the cancer had spread outside my liver, because if it had, then, there's kind of not a lot we can do. And thankfully, the cancer hasn't spread, doesn't seem to be spreading throughout the liver even that much at all. So there are lots of good signs. The doctors think that it'll be a pretty uncomplicated surgery, and things have been going well. So thank you for everyone who's been praying and supporting us in every way. And please continue to pray and also to the time delay issue. Once again, I want to plug our Caring Bridge site. My wife writes wonderful little updates on there pretty frequently. So, if you do want to stay caught up on what's going on with me and my health, that is going to be the best place to do it. And then you won't have to wait on these episodes to come out to hear the good news. So yeah, things are going well. Things are moving fast, and we're very thankful that God's been moving this thing along.
Yeah, and if you do sign up for the Caring Bridge, you can actually go back and look at all of the journal entries in the past and kind of get caught up if you haven't been following Josh's story up to this point. So,
oh, absolutely, and you shouldn't even do it for me. You should do it to get to know my wife, because she is lovely. She's my favorite person, and she puts a lot of her personality into those updates. So you'll get to know the two of us a lot better.
Yeah, it is good.
Yeah. It's fun. She's great.
And that was 281. If for some reason you missed episode 281, I don't know why you would be listening to this John episode if you hadn't listened to the previous John episodes, but if for some reason you came here, you can go back to 281 where Josh gives his initial story on his health and all the links there. So, I think that'll do it for this episode, Josh.
Sounds good. All right. We'll see you in part 2.
Sounds good. If you need to find more details about the show, you can go to BamaDiscipleship.com. So thanks for joining us on the Bama Podcast. We will talk to you again soon with some more John 6 goodness.